I was actually born and then left in a cardboard box outside Spalding Hospital in Lincolnshire. Started reading the book. Within 3 pages, I was like, that's fucking me. Like, that is me down to a T. Flashing in traffic jams, like procrastinate, all that sort of stuff. I started to pull on that thread of like, where's it going now? What else can I read? Like, what else can I do to help me understand myself? I'm going to prove to the world that I am something and I'm worthy and X, Y, and Z. And that's what drives a lot of people. The first day of the MBS can only be likened to going out for your first round, trying to find your range and getting fucking sat down. We all struggled. I think the year I did it, our longest day was a 92-kilometer day. I was in a tent in the middle of Sahara, 50-odd degrees, bollock naked with a tent full of lads. Yeah, and like you just feel full of lactate. You can't move your arms. Like my first ever jiu-jitsu match, the guy was a wrestler, and I hadn't done much wrestling at the time. I have now, hence my ears all fucking dog-eared.
Welcome to another episode of the Old Paratrooper podcast. But before we get started, I want to talk to you about our sponsors, Veterans for Veterans. If you left the military after 1987 and your hearing's taken a knock from your time in the services, click the link in this video. No win, no fee. See if you're eligible.
Welcome to the Old Paratrooper podcast. My name's Marc Rhodes. I'm a coach and I've worked in the coaching space for 13 years, but I've got a pretty interesting backstory that led up to that. So we're going to go through it today with Chris. Really hope you enjoy the episode.
Brilliant, buddy. Well, welcome on board. Absolute pleasure to have you on as a guest, Marc.
Thank you very much, mate. Yeah, I was a bit taken back when you kind of reached out to chat to me. I know you've had some absolute studs on and some legends as well. Good mates of mine included in that. So it's probably not going to be as cool as most of their stories, but hopefully it keeps people entertained for a bit.
No, well, look, I've read your story. I know kind of the bits and bobs it's done. I know your accomplishments. So for me, it's up there with every other the guest. Everyone's got a different story. And I like to get these stories out there. We like to touch on the kind of ups and downs, the highs and lows and stuff like that. So yeah, what I like to do at the start, Marc, quite simply, start at the beginning. Whereabouts you're from, where you grew up, and where your story began and where it kind of ended up. So yeah, over to you. Whereabouts you're from?
Yeah, cool. So I grew up in Lincolnshire, which is pretty unremarkable, really. In fact, I think the only time Lincoln's ever been mentioned is in that episode of The In-Betweeners when even they took the piss out of it. Like, there's not a lot going on there, to be honest. But it's a cool, quaint, quiet little place somewhere over in the East Midlands. But going back even before that, I guess what is the key point of my story is sort of how I was brought into this world. And bear in mind that I didn't actually get to know this information until my 30th birthday, and then it kind of got dropped on me as a bit of a clanger. But yeah, I was actually born and then left in a cardboard box outside Spalding Hospital in Lincolnshire. And I wasn't really privy to that. I knew obviously kind of like my start in life was a bit disjointed and generally different to everybody else's. But I wasn't aware of that fact. So that kind of helped me solve a few problems and understand things a little bit more. But yeah, I was born 2nd of March 1991, and there was actually a national and local press effort to try and find out what the hell had happened and why a baby had been left on the steps outside Spalding Hospital. And that was me. So obviously got punted into sort of foster care and the brilliant people that work in foster services and the NHS and all that sort of stuff. Big props to them, because not only they sorted me out, they save thousands of lives on a regular basis, and they expect nothing in return for doing so. So punted into foster care, and then eventually found my like forever home, which was on a farm, like I said, in Lincolnshire. And kind of grew up knowing, as a lot of your listeners will be as well, knowing they were kind of different. I was very adventurous and explorative, but because that wasn't really catered to in the way I was brought up, I was just an angry little man. Very angry, very active. I used to have this low level of resentment and fucking anger all the time, which kind of is what got me into rugby, if I'm honest. So, all props and love to my adopted parents. They did the best they could, and they put a roof over my head, which I'm tremendously grateful for. But safe to say, outside of that, there wasn't a lot to kind of help and support me figure out, the style that I'd had in life. So that's when I got into rugby, because I realised that I could sort of quote unquote legally express my anger into the game, which is obviously kind of goes in your favor most of the time. And second to that, it was kind of, I grew up really rurally around a lot of people who I didn't understand in a life that I didn't really make sense of. So then to be in like a team of 15, a squad of 22 and a wider playing group, and there's like coaches and men that I looked up to, first team players, all that sort of stuff. They were really my role models. They were really sort of my father figure in many ways, I guess, if you want to call it that. And you kind of, even from a young age, you're talking like 12-ish, you kind of figuring out how they conduct themselves in social situations, like how they communicate, how they, respond to authority. You kind of figure a lot out just through being in that group. So I had a great time with that whilst going through school. It was pretty, unremarkable as an athlete, pretty unremarkable as a student. And then kind of the idea popped into my head, or had been in my head for a while, I think, if I'm honest with myself, that I wanted to join the army. And I think, listening to a lot of the people that you've had on the pod, many of whom are my friends as well, who I've met in later life and are great people. I think a lot of people are drawn to the armed forces, and not just the army, whether it's the Marines, the Navy, Air Force, whatever it is. I think a lot of people are drawn to it for that same reason, which is actually they didn't have much of a father figure. They didn't have much of an authoritative figure in their early life, and they just wanted a sense of belonging, an identity, a sense of purpose to do something that mattered, that's bigger than themselves, all that sort of stuff. So I guess this is all unconscious when you're at that age, when you're sort of 19-ish, I was at the time. But I thought, that's what I want to do. And at the time when I made the decision, I was actually in higher education. I was at university studying agriculture, of all things. That was sort of my last ditch attempt to fit in. I was like, right, I might be pretty rebellious, very angry, already developed a bit of a problem with booze, but here's my attempt to kind of follow in the footsteps of the people that brought me up and go into agriculture. I had a great time at uni studying it, but as I'm sure you can appreciate listening to it, it's not the most riveting of subjects when you're an angry little 19, 20-year-old.
Possibly not, no.
Yeah, so I knew quite early, I was like, this is just not for me at this stage in my life. Ironically, if you gave me a farm these days, I'd be happy as a pig in shit. Yeah. But you know what it's like when you're at that age, you don't appreciate what you've got until it's gone. So I started applying, and because, like I said, I was in higher education, I was due to graduate. I managed to pick up a sponsor and go through the old AOSB route. I don't know what it is now, but it was the Army Officer Selection Board. So I started attending like insight days, and then went on the briefing course, which I think back then was like a day and a half, and did well there. And then you get booked onto the main board, which I think was 4 days back then. And I basically got a deferred pass. Obviously, there's categories of pass, isn't there? I got a deferred pass, which is, you've maybe got the raw potential, but you're not quite refined enough yet. So why don't you come back and have another pop? I think it was a year they gave me to come back and have another pop. But I was due to graduate uni. I was full of beans. I knew what I wanted to do. So I was like, you know what, I'm not sitting around and waiting for a year. And this is back in the days before Capita and all that sort of stuff, where you could basically go back into the recruiting office and you could just transfer your application. The old like brown things we had to manually fill out every cell with a letter. It was like, I think it was application for service, like whatever it was. You could just transfer it. So I made my mind up. I transferred across. And I wanted to go to join a parachute regiment. That's where I wanted to go as an officer. I'd done young officers visits to some gunner regiments, where obviously 2-9 Commando were at the time, and 7 RHA, and that was kind of the route I wanted to go down. But I didn't fancy being in the artillery or being a gunner as a soldier. I don't know why. Don't ask me. I was 21, so you don't know elbow from my arsehole at 21. I just thought, right, I want to be nails, so I'll go and try and join the paras. So I remember the recruiting sergeant at the time was like, "You sure?" I was like, "Yeah." And he's like, "You really sure?" I was like, "Yeah." I think my 3 options were like para. And he's like, right, "Okay." Because I think if someone told me at the time, like, "Yeah, if it's not all 3 options, they won't have you." And I was like, "Oh, okay." So did that, went and did all what was it back in the day? The ADSC, and then obviously you get your certain times and criteria for that. And then when I did the prac,
did you do prac?
Prac, yeah. And I got absolutely beasted because I'd come from a bit of a rugby background. I was carrying a bit more timber. I was expecting to need to be sort of Sandhurst fit, and then obviously I was looking at Power Depot fit, which is just a different gravy, if I'm honest. So I was still a bit of a chunky guy. I was about 90 kilos. I'm only 5'7", so I'm built like a thumb at the best of times. So obviously I was always hanging out, always at the back, which attracted a lot of attention. I got really seen off on that prep, but I did scrape a pass. I got an amber pass. So I got, I think my start date was the 18th of November. And I was absolutely shitting it, but also really, really excited. So I turned up to DAPO. I didn't get very far, mate, is the long and short of it, before my knee started playing up. And then it kind of lit the fuse for an eventual medical discharge. Now, that was probably the first like major failure of my life. You know, I hadn't really, I guess, embodied or soaked up what happened with, you know, the deferral at AOSB, and because of the relationship or lack thereof I had with my parents, I didn't really have anyone to talk to about it. So I was probably a little bit reactive. I was like, nah, fuck it, I'm just going to bounce onto the next, onto the next. So whether or not it was the right decision is now irrelevant. Ultimately, it's what happened, and it's kind of set me off the trajectory that I'm now on, which I'm really grateful for, because it's opened the door to a lot of amazing opportunities. But yeah, you know, going into DAPO, I was probably there altogether about a year thereabouts, because obviously you go through Falklands platoon and you go through rehab and all that sort of stuff, and that's not an easy place to be. People think you're there just because you kind of coast in or you just want to chill out, but actually mentally it's very difficult to deal with when you envision. You've been through depots, you know what it's like. You visualize yourself getting in, going through, passing out as an original, the whole thing, and then actually you see your platoon pass out. I was with Tamara. You see Tamara pass out, and then you're like still just fucking getting dicked with shit jobs and getting treated like an idiot in Falklands, and then eventually get a discharge. It was very difficult to deal with, and I think if I'm really honest with myself, it probably took me 4 or 5 years to get over that. That really profound sense of failure. But I was quite lucky in that training, like strength conditioning with rugby, and obviously getting myself fit to go and attempt Sandhurst and attempt DAPO had kept me very, very fit, and had a real interest and passion about fitness. I was actually sat in a smoking shelter after the last like resettlement day or whatever it was, in Helly's barracks, and I was sat there, having a pint. And one of the lads was like, well, you've always been really into fitness, ironically, as I was sat there smoking a fucking Marlboro Red. And he was like, why didn't you become a PT? And at that time, genuinely, I had absolutely zero comprehension what a PT was. I was like, what, people will pay you to watch them train? Like, are they solid? Like, I don't get it. What's the sell? But I got home that night, started researching, and I was like, actually, this sounds like a bit of me. I think I'd really, really enjoy this. So straight away, got booked on to my level 3 PT course. Even back then, you pretty much could get that award out of a cereal box. You know, it took 6 weeks, driving every day from Market Raising, which is in Lincolnshire, to Nottingham, which is about an hour away. So I was getting up at like 4:30, getting there, get a training session done, study for the day, come home, write my notes up, and I passed and did a really good job on that course. From there, the rest is kind of history when it comes to coaching. Really quickly, I realized that, as many of your listeners and people who've been on the pod will probably attest to, if I'm interested in something, I can hear it once and it's in. Like, I can recite that and I can use it. Like, I can just recall that information really, really well. And that was probably the first time in my life, because it certainly didn't happen studying fucking soil physics at uni, mate. So I could actually recall this information and bring it and use it like day in, day out. And I'm a huge advocate that once you've learned a piece of information, if you can find a way to apply it or teach it to someone else within 48 hours, it really like solidifies that learning experience. So I was obviously learning this great information, then facing clients, getting an opportunity to use it on them, to practice it, to bring it into execution. So I was learning really, really quickly, and I got a real thirst for knowledge. So then I managed to find this opportunity to get an internship at Nottingham Trent University High Performance Centre. And Nottingham Trent University, as a university, kind of punches way above its weight in a sporting context. They've got fantastic setup across rugby, lacrosse, hockey. These squads do really, really well. So I managed to get myself in an internship there, and that's, you know, really where things started to take off, and I started to see myself more as a strength and conditioning coach and not just a gym floor PT. So I was working on the gym floor in Lincoln. I was then doing a year-long internship, you know, and some of my squads, like the remedial squad would start at like 5:30 a.m. I think it was. So I'd like get over to Nottingham, about an hour drive. I'd deliver there. I'd get back to Lincoln, deliver some one-to-one clients, and then oftentimes I'd get back to Nottingham to close up the day, and I had sessions running until about 6:30, 7:30 p.m. with my squads there as well. And then to kind of see myself off even more, because I had this real passion for learning. I'd met a great guy called Grant Brown, who was working with the Olympians and multidisciplinarians at Loughborough University. And it was kind of self-funded, that little training group that he put together. And he needed kind of a practitioner to come in and just do more of the practical. So get them out of the textbook a little bit, talking about, all the stuff that comes up in S&C, and look at, right, is it just someone who can stand here and just watch the movement and have a coaching intervention, or it becomes clinical and data driven? So I was doing that as well. So basically I had this triangle across the East Midlands, and all of them were like an hour apart from each other. So I absolutely grafted. I was building a personal training business in Lincoln, then I was delivering S&C and internship at Nottingham University, and then I was augmenting program delivery at Loughborough University. And then of course the wheels fell off, got glandular fever. After a couple of years of doing that, I kind of had to reassess right, what's the priority here? What do I actually want to do moving forwards? And as much as I love institutionalized sport and strength conditioning and higher education, you just get seen off. You're told it's a 9 to 5, but it really is the epitome of a 5 to 9, and the pay is pitiful, mate. This is why I'm quite outspoken that the best coaches in the world are the people you've never heard of, because they're not out there grifting on social media. They haven't got 100,000 followers. They're not these fucking guys. That are people who are in the trenches working 5 to 9, 6, 7 days a week, year in, year out, without thanks, without praise, without recognition. They're the best practitioners, the best coaches in the fucking world. But I made the decision of actually, I want a kind of a different life for myself. So moved to Manchester, started working there again, built up a private practice of really, really great clients, and then kind of got into the online space. The story about how that happened is probably one that I can't tell on air, but I got into online coaching in 2017, 18-ish. And that was my first experience with getting myself a mentor. I'd been coached for the first time the year before because I thought I was going to have a crack at bodybuilding, and I did. Did very, very well with a federation called UK BFF, which another one of your guests, Lindsay Bruce, he used to be the boy in my division. I was an under 80 kilo bodybuilder. He was underrated as well because we're both hobbits. I'm slightly taller than him. Make sure you get that on file though. But
make sure he knows that you said that.
Yeah. If everyone that's listening to this could just message Lindsay and tell him that I've heard Marc's taller than you, I know he'd appreciate that. But yeah, we're both hobbits, so we get into that under 80 kilo category. I had a great bit of time doing that. But yeah, relocated to Manchester, got into online coaching, and I thought, I've now got a good relationship with actually being the coached person as well. And I was doing pretty well, I guess, commercially, because I've got a passion for coaching and I liked what I was doing. But in terms of systems, strategy, actual business stuff, mate, I did not know my fucking arsehole from a hole in the ground. I was like, I need a mentor here. So I reached out and I took a punt because I trusted this guy, and fair play to him. He saw me right for a good 5 years, and that kind of brings it up to not far off present day. Building a business, as you'll know, is probably the hardest thing you'll do. It's fucking nails. So certainly in those first, and that's kind of marked a segue when I stopped seeing myself as just a coach and started seeing myself as a business owner, and really tried to grow a business and recruit a fantastic team who could help and support the mission and what we're trying to bring to the market and how we support our clients. That was a really, really hard time. And to an extent, even though you're a coach, your own health and wellness kind of gets chinned off a little bit. And I wish that wasn't the case, but it really was. I found myself looking in the mirror after a few years of, all out graft through COVID, when we were just absolutely flat out, and all the stresses that came with that. Pulling 10, 12, 14 hours a day, fucking fueled by caffeine and modafinil most of the time. And you look in the mirror and I'm like, oh my God, what have I done to myself? I look like fucking absolute scrambled egg. So I thought, I need to kind of get a grip of this. But if I'm honest, bodybuilding training didn't excite me anymore, didn't motivate me. Going in and doing the same session 5 days a week, I was like, I'm over this. So that's when I started getting into ultra endurance, or to begin with, running. If I'm honest, running the 5K was hard for me at that time. And I think it was 2023 when I kind of gave it Billy Big Spuds and said, I'm going to run the Marathon des Sables. I'd actually first heard about Marathon des Sables, but from a captain that had done it when I was at DAPO, and there's an aura around him, and I didn't even know what it was back in 2012-ish. And then I've just been kind of thinking about it, and been looming in the back of my mind for such a long period of time. And I thought, well, now I had no kids, I've got nothing on. If you're going to do it, fucking shit, I'll get off the pot time, really. So I did the MDS, kind of caught the bug, bounced straight from that into the Jungle Ultra in Peru in the Amazon rainforest in 2024. Bounced straight from that into the Ice Ultra, which is up in the Arctic Circle, 230k in 2025. I podiumed that. And then I'm only about a month away from back from the Arctic Spine, which is give or take 500k in the high Arctic, which are DNF. That's my first ever DNF. And that brings us up to present day, mate. So that was the whistle stop tour of my life so far.
Yeah, I mean, you've had it. Let's be honest. You were dealt a bit of shit end from the start, weren't you? Let's be honest. You know.
Yeah, it wasn't great, mate.
Well, yeah. I mean, you don't get much more of a kind of, you know. And I want to ask you.
Yeah.
So what age did you get that information that you found out that you was abandoned in a cardboard box, and how did that initially affect you? Would you say that was probably a catalyst for the anger?
So I actually didn't get that bit of information until I was 30. I got it. My
wow.
30th birthday fell during COVID, as I'm sure many birthdays did for many people. You know, I haven't got the best relationship with the people who brought me up, and that's kind of a work in progress. I take responsibility for that, but as I'm sure you can appreciate, it's a difficult dynamic, and I know a lot of your listeners will probably have similar sort of snags. But yeah, I was, can I talk about the vaccine? I was fucking like violently against it. I was like, fuck that, not a chance. My parents are a little bit elderly. So I was like, right, I can't be around them based on this science that's in the zeitgeist. Like I'm a threat to your life, so I can't be around you. So I was living in Manchester. They were still living back up in Lincolnshire. So it came through the post, shit you not, as a letter. Now, like I said, I was aware that I had a disjointed and atypical start to life. I was aware that, you know, that they weren't my real parents, quote unquote. I was aware of all that sort of stuff. But, you know, I just kind of got on with it. You know, as I think any child would, because you don't know any different, you know, so what you go through and the situations you end up in and how you're being treated, you're like, oh, this is just life, isn't it? This is like, you know, you're 6 years old and you're in your bedroom, like, oh, this is it. Like, this is me, happy. Yeah. You just find kind of all these weird ways to cope and get by through these, in retrospect, obviously quite traumatic situations. So I'd kind of, you know, been working with therapists, not just for that, but just because I'm very interested in self-development and being the best version of me that I can be to deliver, you know, really good stuff to my clients. But yeah, it came through the post. I thought it was a birthday card from my parents. I was like, oh, that's a bit thick. I was like, maybe I've fucking got a load of cash. It is my 30th birthday. Fucking sadly not opened it. And it was a photocopied version of the typewritten transcript that was written up by the police at the time that basically they found and brought into custody my biological mother. So it was like a play-by-play of exactly what had happened, the job lot. So the weirdest thing is I wasn't actually the first person to open it. My partner at the time was, and she recoiled, like started reading it and then like really gasped and recoiled and then just went into like hysterics and like fits of tears. I was like, fucking hell, it's a bit heavy. What's in that? So I started reading it. And the weirdest thing, mate, is I guess many people who have dealt with like traumatic things or I guess a lot of guys really, I kind of dissociated in that I just felt like I was reading a film script. I was like, yeah, that's right. That doesn't happen to me. That's not about me. Like, that's just is what it is. You know, nothing's changed. We carry on. And then I kind of was like reflecting though on how the partner at the time had responded, and I was like, should I have been like that? Like, am I a bit broken? Like, and you know, that kind of opened Pandora's box, and maybe there's been some stuff that I'm not dealing with in the best way. So I think I was already scheduled in for a session with my therapist at the time. It was great. It was all done on Zoom. Irish lady, she was awesome, and she kind of asked me to talk her through it, and she's like, you don't not really seem to register much. I'm like, nah, nothing's changed. Like, just a new bit of information, but nothing's changed. And then obviously kind of begin to realize that that's not necessarily the best way to look at things, to process emotion, all that sort of stuff. So it wasn't the start of the anger. I think the start of my anger was, you know, way back when I even first became, you know, consciously aware that things were different and that I didn't feel, I guess, heard and seen in the world, and that my emotions were, you know, a lot of us grew up in the exact same generation, which is, you kind of have to behave in a certain way, otherwise you either got a thick ear from your old man or filled in. So like, you kind of, that's what causes a lot of the anger, I think, is that you want to be yourself and you want to be like a playful, excited, happy kid who might be a bit adventurous, a bit loose. But if you do that, bad things are going to happen to you. So you're always like becoming aware of like people's moods, emotions around you, and you're like, oh, well, if I behave in this way, then I'm not going to get in trouble, or I'm not going to get fucking smack, or I'm not going to get whatever. you can only do that for so long, even as a kid, before like just suppressing who you are, how you want to behave, what you want to say, it just bubbles up and it just becomes anger. So, you know, I didn't often lash out and stuff. I wasn't really very good fighting. So that wasn't an avenue I could use. I've been filled in more times than I can count. But yeah, I just low level resentment and anger inside the whole time. And then, like I said, I worked through it. I actually, when I was working in private practice as a coach, I had a really, really great client. He was older than me, and he was competing for Team GB triathlon age group level. And I really respected him, really looked up to him, because he was like salt of the earth, fucking hard worker, absolute grafter, but he'd done really, really well. I remember he always used to pay me for the session in Reddy's, 50s. And I was like, he's fucking got it together. He's got it dialed in. And then he pulled me to one side, and he basically, it was a backhanded compliment of like, you're a really great coach, but your own worst fucking enemy. And then he handed me the book, The Chimp Paradox. I don't know if you've read it.
Yeah, I started it. I've never got round to finishing it, but
game changer, mate. For anyone that's listening, it'd be probably the number one book that I'd recommend. It certainly changed my life, so it can probably do the same for a lot of others as well. So he handed me this book, The Chimp Paradox, and I was my first ever, like, I guess, self-help book. Back in the days when self-help books were good, most of them could be a fucking blog post these days. But yeah, he gave me it, and I got home, I started reading it. If I hadn't respected him so much, I'd probably been like, yeah, cheers, and I would have just tossed it. But because I respected him, and I thought, you know what, he's obviously figured something out. He's obviously doing well for himself. Like, I've listened to him. So I started reading the book. And within 3 pages, I was like, that's fucking me. Like, that is me down to a T. Like flashing in traffic jams, like procrastinate, all that sort of stuff. I was like, that is me. And then that kind of started to, like, I started to pull on that thread of like, where does it go now? What else can I read? Like, what else can I do to help me understand myself? And it's kind of gone from there, really. So yeah, the anger started younger, and I started figuring it out in sort of my early 20s, and then it's just continually like been a work in progress since then. And now I'm probably one of the most placid people you'll meet. Like, I can dig in and graft like anybody can, but probably one of the most placid people you can meet, because I've lived that 35 years of being exhausted by trying to be angry at everyone and everything, and it just doesn't fucking help.
Well, I think, you touched on some really good stuff there. And I think that self-reflection and trying to seek information and figure yourself out, it's a bit wasted when you're young, because you don't know, you've got no experience. You're just kind of plodding through. You think this is the way it is. And then it's not until you get a bit older, you think, well, hold on a minute. And you do. I've done a little bit the same, to start to research my own brain, the way my own brain works. And it does sort of make you a more placid character, and makes you, I think the better you understand your brain, the better you are.
Yeah.
And I think, yeah, I mean, it's a difficult one. I mean, like you say, your upbringing and stuff, it's just a difficult one. There's a lot of things in there, isn't there, that it's like trying to pinpoint what's this and what's that. But no, I mean, I think where you've got to now, again, I always say this, it's a reflection of your character. It's a reflection of your resilience, your mental kind of, and what sort of person you are. But the power edge thing, which I want to talk to you about, because I can relate exactly to what you're saying there. I didn't get through first time. I did P Company 3 times. I'm quite open about that. I used to wear that as a bit of be ashamed of that. But now I'm like, I see it as what I now know is mental resilience and stuff. The word, I know the resilience is a bit of the word of the day, the word of the year, but I didn't recognize what that was. My ability to push on through and do it 3 times. So I was in DAPO approximately about 8-9 months. So I've been in the Browning platoon, and I've been in those platoons where you're stagnant, and it's not a nice place to be at all, is it?
No, it's not. Yeah, and fair play. Anyone who's gone through and done or attempted or even built up to P Company will know it's not something you want to have to do more than once. Yeah. So doing it 3 times, mate, it just speaks to how much you wanted it, in my opinion. I don't know if you can mention names and stuff on here, but one of my platoon staff was at the time was Corporal Rhodes. And I think he had a number of times at it, maybe similar, if not more than. And again, like, he was the most committed bloke there because of that. So it's like a driving test, isn't it? They say you always want to pass first time, but they often say the best drivers pass second or third time.
Yeah.
Because they've made all the fuck ups and then they've had to go and correct them. They haven't got through on just luck. But yeah, I mean, I'm an open book about it. Like I said, it was something exactly the same. I would have held the information close to my chest for years. I was ashamed about it. But I think actually, like when you get to the crux of it, a lot of men have just got shame full stop.
Yeah.
And then that's just another thing that we can't come to terms. Whenever you're like really ashamed of yourself, or like what we call toxic shame in men, it's just this critical but constant belief that I'm not good enough. But if I achieve X, then maybe that's going to increase my self-worth. So whenever then you fail, because you're already so consumed with this toxic shame and this neurosis, you're not good enough. You haven't got the emotional capacity to deal with that failing, to deal with that accountability, to take that information. So you just avoid it because you're already overwhelmed, and that would completely like paralyze you and overwhelm you entirely. So you just can't deal with it. So that's basically what I did, and many men do this in all walks of life, whether it's like anything, even like not setting a 5K PB time, they can't deal with that. So they start making excuses, or, not doing well at work, and it's all ego and excuses. And it's like, mate, forget the outcome. Like, let's just look at you as a person and whether or not you believe you're good enough. But for me, certainly I was the latter, like really low self-esteem, low self-worth. And I was of the belief that, right, if I get this, and I've like, obviously get into the marine machine, then I'm going to be good enough. And I'm going to prove to the world that I am something, and I'm worthy, and X, Y, and Z. And that's what drives a lot of people. It's certainly what was driving me. Of course, you don't know it at the time, but hindsight's always 20/20 vision. So, when I had that failure, as more men do than not, that go through that pipeline, that process, everyone knows, because your missus was at home cheering you on, like your family know what you're doing, your extended family, all your friends. So when you've got to go home and be like, yeah, no, didn't work, got medical discharge. Like it's the worst feeling.
Yeah.
It doesn't have to be, but you make it the worst feeling because you're so ashamed of yourself, and you're ashamed of yourself because you don't feel good enough without that. So I probably hid from it and ran from it. Years. I think a lot of people are the same. It's very, very difficult to come to terms with. In hindsight, like everyone that I've ever spoken to that I know that's in the military, or as you know, I've got some great friends around me in Poland and stuff. They're all like, "You mate, dodge the bullet anyway." But it probably took me. Yeah, I'm gonna put about 5 years on it, I reckon, before I fully came to terms with it.
Yeah, that is, it is a difficult thing, and you do put a lot of pressure on yourself. And I don't know about you, but it's like you say, it wasn't necessarily that like what you've said there. For me, it was a bit like, what else do I do?
Yeah.
That was a little bit from me. I only had my sights on the military because I didn't know what else to do. No qualifications, no nothing. Troubled, really, really troubled teenager. And it was one of those prison or kind of military. So I was a bit like, this doesn't work. What am I going to do? And I think a lot of people do fall into that category as well, don't they? It's like, what am I going to do? It's this or nothing. But you're kind of living proof that what you've done is you've come away from that. You could let it define you, and obviously it did for 5 years, like you say. But then you've kind of regrouped, rebuilt, restructured, and now you're on this trajectory that you probably wouldn't change now, would you?
No, not at all. Like, and it took me a long time to get to terms with that. Being like, actually, and I like. Maybe I'm becoming a bit soft in my old age, but I'm definitely becoming something more like spiritual or religious. And everything happens for a reason. Yeah. I still think we've got choice and we've got agency, but there'll always be paths presented to you. But sometimes if you're not learning the lesson, the universe is like, oof, it'll just fucking shut you down, and it'll give you a big old dose of pain. And it's like, right, you've got to figure this out because that's not your path. That wasn't meant for you. And it took me a while to kind of come to terms with, oh, right, well, obviously like coaching in the capacity that I do, I've never felt more aligned with anything in my whole life. I don't think it's possible to be. Like, it ticks every box for every value that I hold. I love it, and I hope to do it for as long as I possibly can. This wouldn't be the case if that that plan that I had for myself, my life, had kind of had gone to plan. So I think it's also really important we touch on two things. The first is that I'm sat here talking about like it ruined my life and it was traumatic, when I know you've had some very compelling and very esteemed guests on the pod who have gone through awful things in theatres and all that sort of stuff. I'm not for a second trying to compare myself with that. I'm just saying like my personal emotional experience of that rejection and that failure. and how it impacted me. I'm not drawing parallels at all with all that they've gone through and everything they've sacrificed for me, for you, for this whole country. The second thing is, I guess, the inherent value of like the British military. You know, like the army's one of the things, as many institutions are, that gets a really bad rap of, oh, it's fucking shit and like the British Army's dead and like blah, 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 blah. It's like, right, okay, but you find another institution that's prepared to give people in that situation of life a fucking opportunity. Like, you know, and I'm really fortunate to be friends with some incredible guys who are in exact similar situation to you. As like, back against the wall, I've got nothing going on, nowhere to go, no, like, you know, I've got what the fuck am I going to do? Work in a factory for the rest of my life, or be a fucking career criminal? That's me. Or get in, you know, give service to my country, and as a result, they've ascended the ranks. They've got themselves into phenomenal positions where now they're running like cool businesses from the networks and skills they've built in their time. They're able to travel the world, like do amazing things. It's actually given them, it's created more of a level playing field for them in life, rather than coming from, you know, coming up off the back foot and then just getting passed by people who had a better start in life, which it ultimately isn't fair. Because they're all good people and everyone deserves a chance, everyone deserves an opportunity. And for so many, the British military and the British Armed Forces is that equal opportunities. So like, if you just want to turn up and give service to your country and fucking work hard, then you can go anywhere. You can do anything. You've just got to put the work in. So I think it's really important we speak to the importance of that as well. And there'll always be a big fucking queue of young men and women who probably need that opportunity to belong somewhere as well.
Yeah, no, 100%. And you, I'm hoping, or I'm thinking that you, I know sadly your military career was cut short through no fault of your own, but you will take away lessons from that year you spent in Power Edge training and stuff that you will carry forward. Am I right in saying that?
Yeah, 100%. Like I can remember, and I'm not going to sit here and like, you know, you've had some amazing guests, some fucking very decorated humans and very impressive special force operators on the pod. I'm not going to sit here and like spin DAPO tits, but even still, like the things that were instilled into you into that training establishment. And the one thing that sticks with me to this day was just getting like just beasted as you are on like an exercise, one of the TAC X's, and just, the penny dropped in my head that actually oftentimes the easiest thing to do is the hardest thing. But what I mean by that is like, if you're out on and you're getting fragged and you're quite far away from the block, etc., like you can wrap, but then you're going to have to deal with the fact you've wrapped, and then you're still going to have to tab back in anyway. So really the best thing you can do there is just grin and bear it, shut up and just carry on and do the harder thing. And it will actually be the quickest way to get this all over and done with. Like if you try and take the easy out, life's going to get significantly harder for you. And that's a lesson that's tried and true. And everyone's learned that lesson in their own way at some point if they've done something, you know, ambitious and aspirational. And it stayed with me in business, it stayed with me in racing. And even though I wasn't able to successfully apply that lesson there because my knee specifically broke down, it's a really valuable lesson for really anyone of any age and any generation to learn, is that sometimes actually what you've got to do is not look for the easy way out. It's just grin and bear it, and good things will happen as a result.
Yeah, absolutely, 100%. You touched on there as well. You were saying like, and you were going like, you've had some esteemed guests on, but it's personal, sort of. It's how you perceive the things. And someone put this to me the other day because I said the same. I was speaking about something and I was saying I'm not comparing it. And the guy was a guy, Bobby Henline, a former US Marine that was blew up in Iraq, severely burned, about 85% burned, lost one of his hands. And he was like, no, you're wrong there, because what you've had to deal with is personal to you. So it's equally as hard as what it is to me. It's just the perception for the outside world is different. You've dealt with the same stuff, but just on a different level, so to speak. Does that make sense?
Yeah, absolutely. And I say the same, you know, in coaching, you know, it's all relative. So when I talk about, I'm usually quite slow when I meet new people to talk about the races that I've done, because the last thing you want to do is take the wind out of someone's sails. And, you know, like they'll be talking about how they've just done the first 5K park run and, you know, they've got 31 minutes and they're really looking forward to trying to get faster at that. And that for them was the hardest thing they've done. And I'm like, fucking like, good on you, like good effort. Like there's so much potential here of like what you could do and the benefits you're going to gain mentally, physically, emotionally, spiritually from, you know, setting a hard goal and adhering to the process and seeing that outcome come to fruition. It's an amazing process. And then usually someone will mention like the races I've done, and I see them, it almost makes it, I don't like for people to feel small or feel like what they've done isn't significant, or it's like, well, the hardest thing you've done is the hardest thing you've done. So like it's non-comparable. We can't compare apples to oranges. Like So I 100% get your point. I just want to be really, like, I guess, forthcoming that if I get any recognition, it's for my skill and ability as a coach, and I'm not trying to in any way commit like stolen valor or talk about I was the big I am X Y Z.
You don't come across like that. And I knew your kind of story before, and I know that you're very well respected in the sort of veterans community and serving members community. Like you said, you've had a lot of clients, people, we're not name any names, but anyone who goes to your kind of social media will see who you've coached and kind of the circles that you move in, which again is a reflection and kind of you. You know, these people come and use you as a coach. So that just shows what sort of level and what level you're at as a coach. So no, fair play, buddy. So let's move on like to the events that you've done, because the Marathon des Sables is always the Sable, or however you pronounce it with a Nottingham accent, is something I've thought about doing. Out of all them ones that you've done, so it looks like you've done one every year, 2023, 2024, 2025. Which one for you was the one that really stood out as the one that challenged you mentally and physically?
They all did in their own right. You know, I'd never even run a proper marathon before I did the MDS. And, you know, any of what I found, right, in 2023, and the world moves at a fast pace, it might not be true anymore, but in 2023, I found the community I just found that there was a lot of gatekeepers around running and ultra endurance. And that's why actually, I'm not going to plug myself, but I made a series about it on YouTube. I was like, here's exactly what I'm fucking doing to prepare for this. And, you know, people were always like, oh no, you've got to do like your B races, and you've got to do your build ups, you've got to do X, Y, and Z. And I was like, do you? I said, do. So, yeah, maybe it was just arrogance and naivety. But I hired myself a coach, and it was the first time I've been coached by a female, and she was amazing. So kudos to a lady called Elizabeth Barnes. Again, like, I just looked for someone who'd got evidence that they'd done what I wanted to do, and then also had a track record of helping other people do it. And she'd won the MDS 4 times. She's Norwegian. She's an absolute beast. Not only that, she runs a couple of businesses here in the UK, but she's got those big Merc Sprinter camper vans, and she just lives in Europe and just drives around Europe and works from a van. I was like, she's got it figured out, mate. Yeah, she's really, and she's got PhD. She's a beast. So I got her to coach me, and I was like, do I need to do a race? And she was like, well, you know, oftentimes people do these like B races because they want to build the confidence they can do the main thing. And she was like, you are not coming across as someone who lacks self-confidence. And I guess through the work I'd done, I was like, well, yeah, it's probably accurate. Like, I know if I put my mind to something, as a lot of your listeners will attest to, like, they'll feel the same. If I put my mind to something, I'll get it done. Like, I can crack it. So I kind of just used that. So the first ever quote unquote ultra I did was just a training run. You know, it was all tracked through Training Peak, so she could see the data and stuff. But I just went and did a 50K around Windermere, which was awesome. And I was like, right, that was pretty hard, but it was doable. You know, then you turn up in the desert, and the MDS has changed now. It's owned by a different organization. I did the 2023 edition, which was the last year that it was still owned by the original guy who actually founded the race. And I was really lucky. I was in a tent with Woody. I think you had Woody on. Brian Wood. Yeah, he's a fucking unbelievable guy. I was in a tent with Woody, and I was in one of the Walking with the Wounded tents. Another guy was in a tent. I don't know if you had Duncan on, Big Dunk, bilateral amputee.
No, not yet. I think I'm in talks with him. Yeah, maybe. Yeah,
for sure, a good guy to get on. I didn't get that much time to speak to him, but even the small amount of exposure I had, he's just a different gravy. He's a very inspiring human. So I was surrounded by all these just amazing people, and straight away you're into the bivouac, and like you're in the desert for 2, if not 3 days before the race even starts, just living in the sand under a camel hair fucking tarp. You know, it's absolutely red. It's like 50 odd degrees, and you're just doing admin and checks and all that sort of stuff, and you kind of get this moment when the sandstorms are coming in, like, oh my god, what the fuck have I got myself into? This is a madness. And remember the first, whenever I talk about racing, like multi-stage racing especially, the first day is kind of like your first round when you're scrapping. You know, like, you're going to take a few whacks, but then you kind of figure it out. You get your range, you know what you're in for then. The first day of the MDS can only be likened to going out for your first round, trying to find your range and getting fucking sat down. You're like, oh my god, like, this is going to be a fucking long day at the office. You know, we all had our own moments. We all struggled. I think the year I did it, our longest day was a 92-kilometer day, and then you get a rest day, and then you're back in for a marathon, etc. And I had a really profound awakening then. Like I said, I'd had a lot of shame I'd carried around my life. I always had this fear that a lot of men do, that I wasn't good enough. And going through that, like, you've just got no energy left. So you can't keep worrying about how you're coming across, what people think of you, how you look. And I just felt it literally melt away. Some people will refer to that as an ego death. I felt it all melt away. You know, I was in a tent in the middle of Sahara, 50 odd degrees, bollock naked with a tent full of lads. And I was like, I am who I say I am. Like, I'm here, I'm honest, I'm doing the work, I'm a fucking good person. And that was really affirming for me. And I really buzzed off not only the camaraderie and the connection, which is one element, but also the simplicity of kind of that adventure race life. Because for long parts of the race, you're on your own, like, because of just the speed people want to move at. You know, you're just kind of on your own, figuring your own thing out in your own time. But the simplicity is incredible. You know, turn up, you're in the Sahara for like 7 to 10 days, it was, give or take. What you've got is a day sack, and that's everything. That's all your food, all your admin, everything is in that. And it's a really, really refreshing change from the pace and the expectation of modern life. And back then, they used to basically have like electronic countermeasure that formed a bubble over the bivouac. So there was never any phone signal, no phone signal at all in the race bivouac, which is just like the fucking set of tents they move across the race field. There was no signal. So every day, people from home would have your race number and your tent number, and they could email. They had like 500 characters, I think it was. And then like an agent of the race would come around and give you like a sheet of paper, and it had all your messages from friends and family at home. Wow. And sometimes I had people, a guy who still works with me to this day, Plum, he just put, fucking hell, you finished yet? Like, and you get like this real highs of laughing. Then you also get people saying, you know, this is amazing. Even random strangers would just say like, oh, I wore your race number 3 years ago. Like, do it proud. It was a really, really cool feeling. I got that kind of buzz of setting a goal that's really, really hard. The process of getting to that point, being on the start line, just all of it. I really loved it. But the MDS certainly kind of broke me in its own way. Went into the jungle the next year, and I'm sure many people who listen to this have been to the jungle on various selection pathways. I'm sure many people have been there on their jollies, but either way, they'll speak to how fucking awful that environment is. Yeah. So I think the hottest we got in the desert was around about 60 degrees on the mercury, but you're at 4% humidity. So like, even though you're sweating profusely, you're drinking about 12 liters a day, you're never wet. Whereas in the jungle, you know, we're at 35 degrees Celsius, but it's 100% humidity, as you know, and we're at altitude because we're in Peru. So we'll start at about 4,000 meters. So it's just a trifecta of fuck you. Like, it's awful. You know, you can't cool down because there's so much moisture in the air. You can't sweat. So you just can't cool down. You're drinking your water, you're drinking. Just couldn't cool down. So I went down with heat on the end of day 4, like throwing up, shaking. Anyone who's had the heat will know like how awful it is. You still got to get your fucking, your hammock up. You know, bear in mind, you're doing like an ultra marathon every day for 5 days. And then you're not eating enough because you've got to carry all your own food. So you're eating about 3,000 calories a day and burning about 8 or 9. And then you're sleeping in a fucking hammock. So you're sleeping like a couple of hours max. It's challenging, but equally, you've never felt so alive because of the adrenaline, because of the connection, because of the race field. But be that as it may, I came down with heat on the end of day 4, which was a really tough day. I was throwing up, all that sort of stuff. And I thought that was it. I thought that was my race done. I went to the doctors, the medics on course, and I was like, look, here's what's happening, like seeing double, like throwing up, can't keep food down, can't keep water down. I think I might be done. And one of them, it didn't really need to do anything in terms of medical intervention. It gave me some anti-sickness drugs, and he just sat down and just listened to me basically drip for an hour. And he was like, cool, well, how about instead of having to do it, why don't you just do it because you want to do it? That's a victory lap tomorrow. So I spent a long night in my hammock crying and puking. And then it was a 3 a.m. start for a 75-kilometer final stage. And I fucking don't know where that came from, mate. But yeah, I got that boxed off, crossed the line, and that was probably the most proud of myself I'd ever been in terms of that was the hardest thing I'd ever done up to that point. So the jungle was, for me, physically and mentally very, very hard. It was very, very hard, but it was also one of the most rewarding. And then the year after, I got the opportunity to go, well, not even the year after, about 6 months later, I got the opportunity to then go and run in the Arctic Circle. So that's 230 kilometers. And that was just more kind of my speed because, you know, at the time I was doing all my training in the Lake District. So I was very used to being cold, wet and miserable. And I was kind of okay with that. So training went really, really well. I was off the back of a lot of experience from the MDS in the jungle. I had 2 years experience of knowing how to manage such a long race, like how to manage myself, my kit, my pacing. So I managed to claim a podium, a 3rd place finish on that race, which again I was really proud of. And that taught me a lot about pushing on and persevering, because you always got to remember, if you're on something like the marathon of Sables, you might be middle of the pack or back of the pack. As I was middle of the pack, it's very easy to forget there's a fucking race going on up front, and people are actually properly racing that. So it was weird for me to be at the front where it was elbow to elbow racing. You know, you're talking minutes over 65-kilometer stages, and it's proper racing. That was really, really fun because of that. Like, I was really pushing my own limits of how fast I could cover that. You know, the fourth day, yeah. So you've already done about 180k by that point, is 65 kilometers. You know, we covered that in about 9.5 hours. Like, we were really fucking pushing. Like, we were grafting over mountains, through snow, the lot. But I think the one that's most poignant now is the most recent failure that I've had. You know, I'm just a month back from the Arctic Spine, and that's really the first time I've failed since all those years ago at Paradepot, you know, and having that public feeling of humiliation. And the biggest thing I took away from that failure, and when you talk about failing on the Arctic Spine, mate, only 5 people have ever finished it in 4 years. You know, it is fucking horrific from the get-go. But for me, the massive sense of growth a decade or more later was how I took ownership of that failure, how I took responsibility for it, and how I've actually used it as kind of a growth vehicle of like, cool, I've learned a tremendous amount. I deliberately put myself in an arena where I could fail because I wanted to see what it could teach me. And it taught me a massive amount. So they've all been really hard in their own way. It just depends on, I guess, what you're looking for from it. If you want like real physical adversity, I think the jungle was the hardest on that, for sure. If you want like definitely a very difficult race, but a real sense of connection and camaraderie, then I'd definitely recommend the MDS. It's an amazing race, so well orchestrated, so well run, or it used to be. I can't speak for how it is now. And if you want one that is just going to absolutely see you off from the word go, then the Arctic Spine, mate, that's your race. Yeah.
Well, they're all, I mean, I've read about them all. I've obviously not taken, but I know a lot of people that have done them. I think I was chatting to Dan Holder. Have you heard of that name?
Dan, yeah. So he was on my race. Yeah.
Yeah.
He's definitely worth getting on, mate. He's a fucking unbelievable good guy. Yeah.
He said about the Arctic Spine race, and it feels like we're kind of constantly pushing the limits of human endurance as well.
Yeah.
Because I remember the marathon disables being like the one.
It was the boy, yeah.
It was the boy, and now we seem to be pushing beyond what was, you know, ultra marathons were around 50, 60k. That was, and now they're 300, 400, 500, and you read about people running around Australia and stuff. You're just like, wow,
it's mad, isn't it? And it's like, I guess it's quite nice feeling realizing that this is what the coaching industry is helping humans become capable of, because we're at the bleeding edge of nutrition, physiology, strength and conditioning, and it's helping like the average person do remarkable things. And Dan's definitely one of those people. And the thing with the spine is like, you just got to recognize how vast the skill gap is. You know, so I'd gone away and obviously I'd raced in the Arctic and got a podium. I'd then gone away on like an Arctic training course that like really brushed me up on toe in a polk and skiing and all that sort of stuff. But that course, like, it's just, you know, you're going to be out for 9.5 days, no matter what. You know, you're towing a polk that's in the region of 100 pounds. You're breaking trail through deep snow on skis. The cutoffs are aggressive. You know, so as you'll know in that environment, even if you think, right, okay, I need to get some sleep now. It's like, right, okay, well, you have to dig snow, then you're going to put your tent up, then you've got to melt your water, then you've got to have your food, then you can get in your bag. So 5-hour gap very quickly becomes 60 minutes of sleep. And then you've got to push on like to get to your next cutoff and your next cutoff. So really what makes a difference is obviously you've got to be like fit to do it, but you haven't got to be as fit as if you were going to go and run like, you know, the UTMB, which is like a fast ultra marathon. That's probably a level above from a running ability. You've just got to be very robust. So soldiering is probably the perfect preparation to go and do something like Arctic Spine. Obviously, Dan was with the Royal Marine Reserve, and I think he's done a couple of tours, and he's done a couple of Norways, and then he also works in kind of mountaineering and leading mountaineering expeditions and stuff like that. So his level of aptitude and his administration, and also his reason for being there. He's got a really big and important why, which I won't talk to. I'll let him cover that on his podcast episode. I'm sure you do with him. He's got a really big and important reason for being there. That's also critical. So it all comes together. Like a race that's that severe, you need to be 99th percentile in every one of these areas. Otherwise, it will just chew you up and spit you out no matter who you are. It's but it's an incredible experience, to wake up in -30, watch an Arctic sunrise, self-supported, like it's just incredible. But yeah, it's a beast, mate. It's a beast.
Not for the faint-hearted.
It's not, mate. It's not. And you've got to qualify even to go on the race, even to enter the race. You have to have an interview basically with a race director and make sure you're not going to be a total fucking liability. And there's some incredible athletes that go on that race just for the experience of going there and knowing, there's excess of 95% of people are going to fail. And I think that's a really interesting study then into your psychology and how do you handle that, knowing the most likely outcome is you come off. And can you say you did what you wanted to do? Plum, who's in my team, we entered as a team. He's head of ops here at Uncharted. He's a tremendous athlete. He, again, spent 13 years in the military, most of which with commando forces. Gave it absolute berries for 200 miles. Like, he could not have done any more. He absolutely just destroyed. And doing all that and then still knowing you didn't finish the race was a remarkable lesson for him, which has grown him hugely as a bloke as well. So this is the lessons that these races can give us. You just can't hang all your hopes on, I need to finish, otherwise I'm not good enough, because you can't go into these kind of races with that belief system.
Yeah, and it's a very important point you've put on there. And I'm a big believer in people putting themselves out of their comfort zone, because you learn a lot about yourself. You learn about, you can sit here and go, I think I can do that. But it's like you say, some of these things are beyond fitness. They're about your dedication, your mindset, how you can literally, when all the fucking shit's hitting you in the face, when you're cold, you're wet, you're hungry, you're tired, you get up, you go again, and you keep going. And people think that they have that, but a lot of people are sadly mistaken with that. It's you have to test that and be in those environments to test that, to see if it comes, to fruition. Yeah.
And that's the danger of the ego, mate. We've all got one. We do our utmost to try and keep it in check and be humble as much as we can. But sometimes, it just creeps up, week by week, month by month, year by year. It just whispers little half truths or little exaggerations of our ability and who we are. And yeah, I could probably do that. And then you go and get absolutely fucking slapped about, and you're like, maybe not. Maybe I need to reassess, where I'm at. And I think that's probably one of the most valuable lessons. And I've always kind of had two beliefs. One of which is you can't control where you came from in life. You can only control where you're going, and I've had to live that pretty much every day for my time on this earth. And the second is really, you kind of got to check yourself out. You've got to put yourself in that environment, and you've got to try and stay as humble and honest as you possibly can. There's been times when I've fallen foul of that many times, as we all have. But racing is probably one of the only ways in modern society when you can go and have that. You've got a lot of guests who've come on the podcast who will have had these same realizations, maybe more profound even in theaters and in armed conflict, because you've got to kind of face those harsh realities. But for me, like mortals and civvies like myself, that's obviously not an option. So I still encourage people to find ways to push themselves and to find their limits and find out what they know about themselves. And racing is just kind of a one-stop shop to do that. Just go and get amongst it and see what you find out. It doesn't always have to be a race, but you're always going to push yourself harder in a race environment than you would in a training environment, for example.
Also, those environments are more draining because it's that adrenaline. Like I say, I liken it to boxing and probably going on a rugby field. When you're going for training or you're sparring, the adrenaline's not there. But then when you compete, the adrenaline, it's different levels. Obviously, I'm not likening boxing to endurance events or anything like that.
But it's similar in that. It's a good analogy, mate, for sure. Like, you know that something like you don't know what's coming, and I think that's the biggest thing that humans struggle with. You just don't know what's coming, but you know it's going to work. You're going to get slapped about a bit, and you kind of, you want to have that confidence of like, but I know, like, this is what I do for a living now, is real mental performance kind of coaching. We're always looking at our processes and action-oriented language that's very, not just positive, because that can be as unhelpful as negative, but productive use of language that focuses on your process to control what you can control and do that. But at some point, you might want to actually test that, how good you think you are against like an actual, it's just a timestamp. It shows you the level you were at that day and that time in history. It shows you the level that you were at. And sometimes we're not where we thought we were. And that's equally valuable to learn, though, to take away from that. It's just the way I encourage people to look at it is it's a disproved hypothesis, right? So you had a hypothesis that you've got the mentality and you've trained in such a way that you ought to be successful on this. Let's go run the test. You do the test. whether you come off or whether you finish it, you've either proven or disproved a hypothesis, and it's now up to you what you want to do with that information. You can let it ruin your life for a number of years, as I did failing with the paras, or you can say, right, what did I learn from that? Do I need to change anything now moving forward? Do I want to do anything differently? So Dan's a great guy. He proved his hypothesis very, very well. He had an awesome race. He didn't have it easy by any stretch, but he did a really good job on it.
Oh, mate. Well, absolutely. I find this stuff fascinating. It's why I sit here like pretty much in silence listening to you. It's absolutely fascinating. So what's next? What's the next big adventure? What's the next challenge? Is there anything that you can do, sort of say or?
Yeah, I mean, it's there's certainly nothing I'm concealing in terms of races or anything like that, you know. So I've done 4 of quote unquote the world's toughest races on the bounce, and I've my body's dealt with that remarkably well. If anything, like ultra endurance, is if you do it properly, is kinder on your body than just about any other sport I've been involved with. You know, rugby, bodybuilding, jiu-jitsu. It's funny you mentioned that, IG, about adrenaline. Like you said, I did jiu-jitsu for a number of years, and you can have hard rounds all you want in the gym, but when you're in the middle of like the competition, and usually it's like a fucking a sports hall with just some mats on it, and you 2 people get called, and then you missus is watching you, or your friends are watching you, your coach is watching you, other guys from the gym are watching you. It's different gravy. And then when you get that adrenaline dump and your mouth goes dry and your heart rate's doing 120, you're like, oh shit.
Yeah.
And someone actually grabs you, wants to do you harm. Yeah. You think you're fit until someone who wants to do you harm fucking grabs on you, and you're like, oh fuck. You know,
and the weird bit is as well, I box on the unlicensed scene at heavyweight, right? So I kind of just I was not a particularly great boxer, but I knew the heavyweight scene was big lads that will try and knock you out in a round. So my sort of logic was, I'll make myself ridiculously fit, cardio-wise, that once they tire, and if they've not knocked me out, I'll outpoint them, outwork them, and I'll win. And it worked for 15 fights, only lost once. But I'd always find an Anuma VO2 max at certain stages in the early 70s. I'd go into a ring, and after the first 30 seconds, I'd be hanging out my arse, and I couldn't get my head round.
Yeah.
I'm fit enough to do this. And that's the adrenaline dump, isn't it?
Yeah, it is. Yeah. And like you just feel full of lactate. You can't move your arms. Like my first ever jiu-jitsu match, the guy was a wrestler, and I hadn't done much wrestling at the time. I have now, hence my ears all fucking dog-eared. But you know, he wanted to start on the feet, and I was like, oh shit. I was like, I'm not putting guard because we know what that means. But yeah, I was like, I'll stay on the feet. So what was it 5? About the first 4.5 minutes we were on the feet, and I was absolutely gassed to the point where I basically gave him a double leg. Because I was like, I just want to be on the mat, mate. I just want to be on my back so I can get to work. So I was like, fucking just have it. Boof, got blast doubled, and the rest is history. But it was a good scrap. But yeah, I can't remember what the original point was and why we're talking about that. But in terms of what's next? Yeah. So I've had a good 4 years of racing. I've learned a tremendous amount. And really, the Spine was the last race for me where I looked at it being like, that's the big boy. That's the one that's so scary. I didn't even say out loud for a while that I was doing it, because it was like, wow, that's real now. If we talk about that, I feel like I learned everything I wanted to learn from that, and I'm not going to have that reflexive knee jerk of I want to go back and I've got to do it. Like I'm like, I'm a piece of it, of what it takes to do that race, and that's not where I'm at. So really continuing to double down on the business is important for me, especially with AI and how that's going to change my industry. We want to be at the bleeding edge of that and make sure we can continue to bring the best service we can to our clients when the world has never been more uncertain. And as part of my commitment to that, of giving guys like unique and profound experiences, we're really leaning into doing more and more expeditions of bringing guys together in a way that, as you'll know, like doesn't really happen that much anymore. I think obviously you can speak to the power of the veterans community and how that can bring people together because they've got a shared interest and you know, everyone's on the same page of how they want to talk and the way the world should run and stuff like that. But outside of that culture, men don't often have that very, very much. You know, they probably were in sport, playing rugby or whatever it was in their teens and early 20s, and then they get into corporate industry for 20 years, and all of a sudden they've got no mates. They don't spend any time in the outdoors anymore. They're not adventuring. They haven't looked after their health in the way they want to. So I think, you know, using the experiences that I've gained and all that I've learned in coaching for over 13 years now, just about 13 years now, should I say. It almost feels like a bit of time to give back of like, let's instead of having to train for an audacious goal like running the marathon of Saba, let's just get you fit enough that you could hike in Cairngorm for 3 days, for an example. And that's actually what we're doing this April. And we've got another one in Colorado in September. So as part of that, I'm very fortunate. I've got a great group of peers who have got all sorts of international mountain guiding quals and MLs and stuff like that. But I'm also committing to finishing off my ML assessment so we can start taking lads out on the hills more frequently, obviously do it the right way. A lot of people are a bit shotgun about that. It's all good until it's not, until someone falls and breaks their leg and then you're fucked. So we're going about it the right way. And, the thing that got me into ultra really in the first place was I loved being outdoors. I loved being in the hills. Living in Manchester for 6 years, I was always in the lakes. So anything that can give me the opportunity to spend more time outdoors whilst doing what I love, which is coaching, it's a fucking win-win. So really all guns blazing on that front. And if a race comes up that, really tickles my fancy, I'm probably not going to say no, but it's not the front and center of, this is everything for me. I've got to go and prove a point. I'm kind of at peace with it for now, mate.
Brilliant stuff, mate. Brilliant stuff. Well, look, it's been absolutely fantastic talking to you. I knew it'd be a good chat, and it's good to delve into the mind of a coach at your level. I've had some on, and a bit like everyone's different. All guests are different, and I always come away. I know I've had a great podcast when I come away taking away certain aspects, and there's bits in there that you've mentioned that I've related to, and I'm going to go, you know what, I'm going to employ that to my kind of everyday life and stuff. So thank you very much for that, buddy. Thanks for coming on and sharing. And yeah, I'll have a quick chat with you off air in a second. But no, I wish you well in the future, and please stay in touch. If there's any way I can help you moving forward, or we can link up and network, then brilliant stuff, buddy.
Yeah, for sure, mate. Thanks for having me on, and hopefully people didn't get bored to tears throughout it.
I doubt that very much, mate. I doubt that very much. Absolute pleasure, Marc. You take care, buddy.
Cheers, Chris.